Shocking moment. Sheriff slaps young boy at assembly, then defense secretary enters to clapping. Jake Thompson sat fidgeting on the hard bleachers, feelings of grief blurring into anxiety. The annual back-to-school assembly felt like both a tradition and a trap. A wave of whispered conversations washed over him, reminding him of the laughter that once echoed through his home, now reduced to the empty air that filled the auditorium. His father, the sheriff, once stood proudly before him, but now Jake's heart sank at the thought of his absence. The spotlight on the stage illuminated Sheriff Bill, his stern figure cutting through the crowd as he began to speak. The same man who now brought Jake nothing but dread. As he looked around, parents exchanged weary glances, while classmates whispered, their eyes darting toward him like buzzing flies around a wound. A knot tightened in Jake's stomach. He could feel his father's guiding hand slip further from his grasp as the assembly continued. Would they remember the man, or would they only see his son? A broken piece in a much bigger puzzle. Just then, a harmless prank erupted from the back row. Laughter turned into chaos, and the audience turned towards Jake, a single name uttered from afar. Jake! A misplaced accusation. It didn't matter he'd been quiet, merely a shadow blending into a world he no longer understood. But the weight of blame descended on him like a storm cloud. Sheriff Bill moved toward him. Time stretched as Jake's breath caught. A sharp crack echoed in the room. Jake's cheeks burned as his eyes widened. The sheriff's hand stung against his skin. Immediate shock froze him in place. Laughter evaporated, replaced by a collective gasp. Jake's heart raced. Betrayal coursed through him, a betrayal from the one man who was supposed to lift him, protect him. Everything he'd believed about duty crumbled as whispers ignited the air, filling the silence with murmurs of disbelief. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the defense secretary strode in, Jake felt a rush of confusion. The thought of someone so powerful standing between him and Sheriff Bill seemed surreal. The secretary spoke of resilience and humanity, his voice a soothing balm against the sting of the sheriff's slap. Yet each word dug deeper into Jake's heart, a reminder of the dad he lost and the respect he felt fading away. How can he understand, Jake thought, caught between longing for the warmth of acceptance and the icy coldness of judgment. Then the atmosphere shifted, like a sudden breeze chasing away the clouds. The secretary shared an unexpected connection to Jake's father, revealing how closely their lives ran parallel. Suddenly, the assembly wasn't simply about Jake anymore. Murmurs swirled around him, creating a cyclone of emotions. Was it true? The revelation shattered Jake's understanding of loyalty and familial bonds. What did it mean to live in the shadow of a legacy now tainted? Glimpses of approval sparked among the crowd, and Jake's heart began to pound. A chant of support swelled, but he remained paralyzed, conflicted between stepping into the light or shrinking back into insignificance. The feeling of betrayal from Sheriff Bill rubbed raw against his skin, but the pull of his father's legacy weighed heavily in his chest. As the assembly continued around him, Jake stood at a perilous edge. The storm inside him brewed. It was more than merely a call to fight back. It was a challenge to redefine his place in this tangled web of duty and desire. Would he emerge, not just as the sheriff's son, but on his own terms? Or would he slip into the shadows, severed from everything he thought he understood? Jake stood frozen in the limelight, the assembly hall pulsating with a current of confused energy. The defense secretary's speech had pulled him in, weaving familial ties to a stranger's understanding that felt both comforting and alien. Deep inside, something began to stir, coaxing him to confront the myriad feelings swirling within him. Why am I letting this happen? He grappled with the thought, each tick of the clock amplifying his inner turmoil. Sheriff Bill's moment of public disgrace momentarily became a backdrop. Jake had to wrestle with his own identity. How long could he remain anchored in the weight of paternal expectations that felt both inherited and tarnished by betrayal? He shifted his weight on the bleachers, his eyes darting between the faces in the crowd, each expression morphing into a magnifying glass, scrutinizing him. Instead of disappearing into his insecurities, an ember of determination ignited. Jake's hands clenched into fists. He could choose how this story would unfold, and it was time to write his own chapter. As the assembly drew to a close, Jake felt the ripples of murmured associations regarding Sheriff Bill seep into the fabric of how others perceived him. A wave of voices broke through, voicing awe at the secretary's personal anecdotes, while tentacles of condemnation still lingered, shackling Jake. But as he stood there, he wrestled with the thought that he could ultimately unshackle himself from this perception. In the days following the assembly, Jake sought solace in the few spaces where he felt unencumbered. A quiet park nearby had become his sanctuary, a place to think, to breathe away the residual tension from the assembly. There, he often reflected on the idea of legacy. Was he doomed to repeat his father's mistakes, or was there a different path awaiting him? He found himself doodling in his notebook and soon flowed into writing. Jake had always been drawn to storytelling, sketching narratives that blurred the line between dreams and reality. Words poured out like a refreshing spring, resonating with the chaos inside him. What if, he mused, this gift could be my voice? Jake's newfound affinity for writing amplified his feelings, becoming an outlet to challenge his anguish and evolve. He began to pen stories about individuals facing betrayal, characters who defied their circumstances just as he aspired to do. Each word was a step towards clarity. Each page bore witness to the man he wished to become, bold, unapologetic, and true to himself. Yet for all the catharsis he found in writing, temptation loomed. Questions surfaced like ghosts. What would others think of his stories? Could he share them without judgment? Struggles with vulnerability tangled with aspirations for connection. Jake struggled with the notion of revealing his truth. He faced an inevitable confrontation with his peers. Was he ready to share this new version of himself? As weeks rolled by, he prepared for the first meeting of the school's literary club, a gathering he had both longed for and feared. The echo of laughter and camaraderie paired with anxiety drummed in his heart. Stepping into that room meant risking the very essence of his burgeoning identity. The time had come. Would he dare to step forward as Jake Thompson, the writer, a boy learning to navigate the world beyond his father's shadow? Or would he retreat into familiar safety, quiet and unassuming, forever defined by others' perceptions? He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the next step, discovering whether he had the courage to unveil his stories, beginning the journey to transform his pain into power. As he walked towards the literary club, he felt an undeniable truth resonate within him. The moment of revelation was upon him, and it was time to face the roots of his fear. As Jake approached the door to the literary club, the muted whispers of his peers permeated the air, a blend of anticipation and trepidation swirling around him. Each step felt heavier than the last, as he battled a wave of insecurity crashing against the shore of his resolve. His heart thudded in a rhythm that seemed to echo both his excitement and doubt. This was a pivotal moment, one that could redefine him, yet also expose him to judgment. He paused, catching a glimpse of his reflection in the polished glass beside the door. The boy, staring back, wore a mask of uncertainty draped over brewing determination. What if they don't accept me? That question clawed at his mind like an unseen spectre, pulling him back toward the safety of anonymity. He shook his head, dispelling the thoughts that threatened to engulf him. Pushing the door open, he was met with a warm brightness, and the sight of fellow students gathering in a circle, laughing and sharing their thoughts. The atmosphere buzzed with lively chatter, but it felt like a foreign language to him, one filled with familiarity that eluded his grasp. He stood at the threshold, grappling with the urge to retreat, but the memory of the assembly, of his father's lingering shadow, snapped him back. Once and for all, you need to find your voice, he reminded himself, narrowing his focus. Gathering strength from an internal well of resolve, he stepped into the room, every eye instinctively swiveling toward him, dissecting his presence like a specimen under a microscope. "Hey, you made it!" A girl with bright hair waved him over, her smile infectious. It was a small gesture, yet it offered a lifeline. Jake eased into the circle, allowing the warmth of acceptance to replace his icy fears. As he settled into an empty chair, he could sense something shifting within him, a quiet confidence beginning to take root. As discussions unfolded, topics veered from favorite books to poignant moments experienced through writing. Fellow members shared their work, unveiling pieces that sparkled with raw honesty. He listened attentively, absorbing their vulnerabilities as they bared personal experiences, their powers resonating deeply with him. They weren't afraid. Each voice carved out a place for itself, holding its own in the musical symphony of storytelling. The nervous energy in Jake's chest constricted tighter as the moment approached when he'd have to share his own work. The fear of judgment clawed at him, and he could feel the sweat bead on his palms. But as he considered the stories he had been pouring his heart into, one in particular began to echo louder than the rest, a tale of a boy dismantling the expectations imposed by his father's legacy. "Jake, do you want to share something?" The facilitator's gentle inquiry caught him off guard, breaking the spell of his internal discourse. He opened his mouth, words tangled in his throat, but the image of his father loomed large in his mind, an oppressive shadow he was terrified of consolidating into his identity. Would sharing his story mean bearing that burden forever? Yet within that trepidation lay a burgeoning resolve. He inhaled deeply, allowing the moment to stretch into eternity. "Yes, I do," he found himself saying, surprised at the clarity in his voice. As he pulled out his notebook, the scrawl of heartfelt words trembling beneath his fingers, he glanced around, his peers exuding intrigue, welcoming him into the fold. With each line he read, he could feel the narrative pulse through his veins, his past unfurling like a flag captured in a gust of wind. "This is me," he realized. "Not just my story, but the power of my truth." As the last sentence rolled off his tongue, punctuated by silence that felt both profound and electrifying, Jake locked eyes with a few of his peers. An affirmation flickered in their gaze. Perhaps it was not so much about accepting others as it was about embracing himself. But as a soft ripple of applause began to swell, his heart raced with another realization. The true confrontation lay ahead. Would he allow his voice to thrive beyond this moment, or retreat into a memory shrouded in fear? Each decision hung heavily in the balance. Jake's journey of self-discovery was just beginning, as shadows of his past seemed to converge on the horizon, ready to challenge the truth he had begun to forge. The real question loomed: could he withstand the tempest ahead, or would the spectre of his father's legacy prove too strong? The horizon of possibility awaited him, but he had yet to grasp it fully. The moment had shifted, and clarity beckoned him to embrace an unfolding path, one that would demand courage in every step. Jake left the meeting that day with a cocktail of emotions swirling within him, an exhilarating rush blended with a lingering apprehension. The applause had startled him, a sound both foreign and familiar, pulsating through the fabric of his self-doubt. As he walked through the tall grass of the schoolyard, he replayed the moment in his head, the words he had shared interwoven with the fear that gripped his heart earlier. It was clear that he had taken a step forward, yet the weight of his father's expectations still loomed above him like a storm cloud. Days passed, yet the vivid memories of that evening echoed in his mind, urging him to write more. In the solitude of his room, he poured himself into his notebook, the pages filling with fragments of ideas and raw truths. He began to mold those experiences, embracing the notion that his struggles were worthy of being written into existence, his voice deserving of recognition. However, a haunting question gnawed at him. Could he remain genuine while braving the inevitable scrutiny? Would the approval of his peers suffocate or liberate him? As he scribbled fervently, each pencil stroke felt like a defiance against the lurking shadows of his father's legacy. The literature club met again the following week, and this time Jake arrived with a new sense of purpose. His heart raced not with dread, but with anticipation, as he clutched pages filled with words that both frightened and empowered him. Self-doubt was a relentless critic, whispering the old fears, "What if they judge you? What if you fail?" As members gathered, laughter and casual banter filled the room, a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside him. He sat among them, inwardly battling against the memories of judgment that had haunted him before. The facilitator, a mid-30s woman with a calming presence, addressed the group, opening the floor for sharing. "Who wants to go first?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. Jake's heart quickened, a duality of resolve and trembling uncertainty tightening its grip on him. His hand reached for the notebook. He hesitated just for a moment, but the image of his father and the shadow it cast broke his paralysis. He stood up, the immensity of his decision dawning on him. This was more than just sharing a story. It was his declaration. "I'd like to share," he said, the words flowing from his lips with newfound clarity. He felt the weight of their gaze but pushed through, driven by a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. Reading aloud, he described his protagonist's journey, an exploration of identity, expectation, and breaking free from the chains that had confined him. With each word spoken, he witnessed the tentacles of fear slowly unraveling. When he finished, a charged silence enveloped them, hanging heavy in the air. He held his breath, waiting for the reaction. Then applause broke through the stillness, rippling with enthusiasm and genuine appreciation. But there was something deeper at play. The applause felt transformative, yet the echoes of doubt persisted. It was infectious. Other members began sharing their own similar fears about their work and their families, the fabric of their lives weaving together in complex patterns of aspiration and inhibition. In that moment, Jake didn't just see himself reflected in their tales. He witnessed a community grappling with their own shadows, each word spoken magnifying their vulnerabilities, their struggles illuminating paths unseen. His own battle was shared, and the realization struck him with a warmth, a deep human connection forged in honesty. As the meeting drew to a close and he settled back into his chair, he contemplated what this group meant for his growth. Could he embrace the discomfort of his story as others had? With each encounter, he began to understand the true nature of bravery. Was it not just confronting his own past, but holding space for others' narratives as well? Yet as the final applause faded into the air, the nagging question resurfaced. How far could he go with this newfound voice? Could he sustain it beyond the confines of the club? The storm of his father's expectations still rumbled ominously in the distance, and Jake wondered if the tempest was merely gathering strength, or if it could be transformed into something empowering. With uncertainty dancing on the edge of discovery, he realized that the real challenge lay ahead. In full view, the path was not merely about voice and expression. It was also about the grit to stay true to oneself amid the echoes of the past. Each session drew him closer to a precipice, the moment when he would need to confront his father directly. What awaited him there could change everything. Would he stand firm in his resolve or falter beneath the visible pressure? The clarity he had begun to seize was only a flickering candle against the darkness. As he left the meeting, the flicker beckoned him deeper, a journey that was far from over, with looming revelations just ahead. The days that followed the meeting were a swirl of anticipation and conflict for Jake. Each morning he awoke with a different understanding of who he was becoming, but always with that familiar heaviness in his chest, the weight of expectations pressing down, buoyed by an emerging sense of agency. As he unpacked his thoughts, writing became not only a sanctuary, but also a battleground, where he fought against the inclinations to erase himself in favor of others' approval. Classroom discussions wove a thick layer of tension into his daily routine. Not only was he grappling with his to-write or not-to-write dilemma, but also with the thoughts of his father's reaction to his chosen path. He knew the business world awaited him, a world carefully outlined by his father's ambitions. Jake often found himself at a crossroads, feeling the friction between loyalty to family and the possibility of carving his own existence through writing. The next literature club meetings felt charged, a tempest brewing just beneath the surface. Jake's voice had warmed the room, and with it came the growing expectation that he would continue to share. But every time he prepared to share another piece, he faltered, the echoes of not enough ringing louder in his mind. In the solitude of his dimly lit room, he took stock of his progress. His notebook had transformed. Pages were now filled with raw reflections of pain, joy, and moments of truth. Yet uncertainty loomed over the unfurling pages like the spectre of an impending storm. Would he put quill to parchment again in front of others? It was a jigsaw puzzle, and he was perpetually missing that one crucial piece. One evening, after a particularly charged session with the club, where he had remained silent out of fear, Jake sat up on his bed, the night whispers creeping in through the window. With a resolve ignited by frustration, he wrote a letter addressed to his father. He poured every ounce of his vulnerability into the words, questioning what it would look like to communicate honestly, the very essence of his identity. His hand trembled as he signed it, leaving it unsent, a powerful testament to what remained unsaid. The next club meeting arrived, and the atmosphere crackled under the weight of unshared stories. As the facilitator encouraged support and kindness, Jake once again felt those familiar insecurities clawing at him. He wanted to rise, to bring forth his recent feelings, but there was hesitance, an iron grip around his heart. He took a deep breath, pondering the faces around him. They were companions on a shared journey, each battling their own invisible demons. In that moment, he understood. Vulnerability is not a solitary endeavor, but rather a catalyst for others. "I have something to share," he finally announced, his voice laced with trepidation. As he spoke about his letter, he purposely refrained from recounting its content, but instead focused on the freedom he felt in expression. His words began to soften the resistance within, though the struggle against self-doubt surged beneath, a very personal elixir of liberation and fear. Afterward, the group erupted in empathy and encouragement, but Jake could feel the shadows of apprehension still looming. Just as he was beginning to sense the cumulative strength of shared experience, the facilitator leaned closer, her voice unusually solemn. "Jake," she said, her gaze piercing, "the act of writing is a call to courage. Have you ever thought about addressing these emotions to the person they're intended for?" Her words jarred him. They reverberated in the quiet recesses of his mind, addressing his father directly, unearthing those long-held, unvoiced feelings. It could be the ultimate confrontation, a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready to undertake. As Jake departed from the meeting, he felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread pulsating through him. The flickering candle of clarity seemed to become a steady flame, yet his path lay ahead, filled with potential for both triumph and confrontation. What would happen when a son faced a father, ruler of expectations and dreams? Would Jake reclaim his narrative or succumb to the looming shadows? The gravity of his journey was starting to reveal profound complexities. One single decision awaited, a moment that could shift everything. The time had come to face his father. The sun hung low in the sky as Jake stood before the mirror in his room, a swirl of emotions pinballing through his mind. He felt the weight of expectation pressing against his chest, heavy and suffocating, but deep inside, a spark stirred, a burgeoning determination to confront what lay ahead. Today was pivotal. Today he would face his father. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar. The reflection staring back felt foreign yet familiar, like an uncharted territory. Would he be bold enough to not only speak his truth, but to carry the conversation forward? The prospect of silence hung ominously, a reminder of the many moments when he had withheld his voice. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the support he had found within the literature club. They had provided glimpses of understanding through their shared vulnerabilities. Writing had become a powerful conduit, flowing not only through his pen, but also into the cracks of his shattered self-confidence. He clutched the unsent letter tightly, a manifesto of his fears and aspirations, a written measure of his resolve. Jake stepped outside into the brisk afternoon air, the chill biting at him, but he welcomed it, a tangible reminder of the fight within. With each step toward his father's office downtown, he felt his heart rate quicken, anticipation and fear intertwining. What if the confrontation turned into a confrontation of wills? Would his father see his passion as folly, or would he recognize the man taking shape in his son? As he approached the door to the office, he hesitated, hands resting on the handle. Memories of childhood washed over him, his father's proud gaze at every small achievement weighed against moments of disappointment when his interests strayed too far from their familial blueprint. He had always sought to mold himself into the image that would meet his father's approval. Yet, ironically, it was in this very moment of pause that he realized he was beginning to understand the contours of his own identity. With one last deep breath, he turned the handle and entered the office. The room was expansive and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos crawling beneath the surface of their relationship. His father looked up from his desk, a surprised frown creasing his forehead. "Jake," he began, folding his hands, "what's on your mind?" It was time to push past the familiar urge to retreat into silence. "Dad, I need to talk about what's happening between us," Jake blurted out, his voice steadying as he continued. "I've been thinking a lot about who I want to be and what I want to do." The words flowed out, buoyed by the courage he had gathered from his recent experiences. He detailed his intentions to write, sharing how it felt like a calling, a beacon of authenticity amid the expectations that felt increasingly stifling. His father's expression shifted gradually from curiosity to something more guarded, a wall he had always sensed, but never fully encountered. "Writing is risky, Jake. You could be throwing away your future," he warned, control lacing every syllable. Jake felt the pull of tension coiling within. Here was the battle he anticipated, the familiar conflict, both terrifying and comforting. "But it's my future too. I can't just follow a path that isn't mine," he countered, his heart racing but his determination firm. For a few lingering seconds, silence enveloped them, thick and charged. Jake watched as a myriad of emotions flitted across his father's face. Confusion, frustration, perhaps even fear of what it meant for the future of their relationship. But as that silence stretched on, Jake recognized an opportunity. This was an opening for deeper exploration of their dynamic. Would this confrontation shatter the notion of who Jake was supposed to be, or would it pull his father into a new understanding? The complexities of their relationship swirled, revealing a pivotal truth. Sometimes facing the fear of vulnerability could ignite deeper connections. With a decisive breath, Jake leaned in. "Dad, I just want a chance to explore what's in my heart. But just as he finished his thought, an unexpected sound broke through the tension, shattering the moment. A call from the intercom interrupted, leaving both men at a precipice of revelation and uncertainty. "Jake, what would you do now if you had the chance to redefine everything you've known about yourself?" Jake's heart raced, the intercom's intrusion feeling like an ice-cold splash of water, stripping the momentum from his carefully constructed confrontation. He glanced at his father, whose brows had knitted tighter in irritation. The moment had rippled with potential, an uncharted territory that Jake had dared to step into, and now it threatened to slip through his fingers just as quickly. "Can you hold on just a second, Jake?" His father's voice cut through the air like a knife, and he reached for the intercom button, his back turned to Jake. This brief reprieve gripped Jake's gut with anxiety. He didn't want the moment to vanish. He had worked too hard to muster the courage to express himself truthfully. Pacing slightly, Jake felt the weight of unspoken words pressing heavily on his chest, a suffocating reminder of all the conversations they had failed to have. How often had he shied away from saying what he truly felt? Were there more moments like this left untried, each sequentially passed like the tick of a clock? He needed to find a way to refocus both himself and his father upon what mattered most, his voice, his passion. As his father wrapped up the conversation on the intercom, Jake seized the opportunity to gather his thoughts, mentally folding them like his letter. What if he went further? He could confront not just the fear, but also the missed connections that had built a wall between them over the years. The stakes were about more than just his choice. They were about reclaiming their relationship. "Okay, Dad," his father said, turning back to him. The lines of tension around his mouth softened slightly, but Jake could see that the rigidity remained. He re-engaged, eyes intent on his son. "Now, what did you want to discuss?" With newfound determination, Jake leaned forward slightly, a shift in energy palpable in the space between them. "Dad, I know you're worried about what I'll do with my life. I am too. But if I don't try to be true to myself now, when will I?" The urgency in his voice was layered with a conviction that he hadn't felt before. This was not merely about his ambitions. It was about bridging the chasm of understanding between father and son. His father shifted, a subtle yet significant crack in his facade, as he cast his eyes downward, briefly exposed. "Jake, I want what's best for you. I've seen people fail, and it's painful." "Painful," Jake echoed, as if laying bare a wound. "Growing up, I was always pressured to avoid risk, to play it safe. If that led to pain, I wouldn't even know what my own dreams are." His voice grew stronger, emboldened by the intricate layers of emotions they had both buried over years of silence. "This is how I want to live. I've been afraid of disappointing you, but I can't keep silencing my own dreams to protect you from fear." Jake watched as his father's expression tightened, a mix of frustration and empathy swirling beneath the surface. It was the unspoken acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability, a common ground igniting a flicker of understanding. The tension unfurled into a cautious dance, an exchange of truths that could reshape them. "Life demands risks," Jake continued, heart pounding. "I could fail, but isn't that better than never knowing what I could have achieved? I'll find my path, but I need your support, not just your approval." Jake's words hung heavily in the air, silence settling once more as they weighed their options. Would his father allow himself to step aside from his own fears to engage in this newfound territory of possibility? The moment was palpable, thick with unresolved issues, yet there was a shift, the precarious balance of their relationship teetering on the edge of transformation. Then suddenly, the intercom buzzed again, shattering their quietude yet again. Jake's breath caught as he realized the opportunity was slipping away, but he wouldn't let it fade completely. "Dad," he said quickly, interrupting the awkwardness before another pause could stifle him. If I'm to define myself apart from your expectations, you need to let me do that without fear of your disappointment. Can we talk about this uninterrupted? The unrelenting beat of his heart was masked only by the building resolve in his chest. Just as his father opened his mouth to respond, the door clicked open, revealing a dark-haired woman in a crisp suit, her expression teeming with authority. Her presence, sudden and commanding, signaled another disruption, an event that could steer their conversation into unfamiliar waters. "Jake, we need to discuss the upcoming literature symposium," she stated, cutting straight to the point, oblivious to the emotional whirlwind that had just unfolded between father and son. The moment tinged with both excitement and dread, leaving Jake standing on the precipice of revelation, wondering if he could find his voice amid new challenges. Would this symposium become a new avenue for exploration, or merely a distraction from the essential conversation still waiting to be had? Jake's pulse quickened as he turned to the woman, the weight of her authority pressing heavily against his moment of vulnerability. He'd almost reached a breakthrough with his father, only to be interrupted by this unexpected newcomer. It felt like sand slipping through his fingers, and he had to reclaim it. "Who are you?" Jake managed, his curiosity piqued, although his disbelief lingered like a storm cloud. He had just taken a daring stand, something he had dreamed of for years, and now it appeared to be fracturing. "Lena Woods," she introduced herself, extending a hand, her tone direct and professional. "I'm coordinating the symposium. Your father mentioned you would be participating, and I believe we need to finalize some details." Jake glanced at his father, who exhibited a blend of annoyance and curiosity. The fabric of their conversation hung in limbo, as if waiting for an invisible signal to either re-engage or retreat into the comfortable silence they had maintained for years. "A literature symposium?" Jake echoed, momentarily bewildered. This was the last thing he had anticipated. He wanted to express himself, but now there were layers of expectation wrapped around him. "So, what does that mean for me precisely?" Lena took a step back, assessing him with sharp eyes. "It means you have an opportunity to showcase your work, potentially even to industry leaders. It's an exciting platform for emerging voices." Jake felt adrenaline rush through him, igniting a flicker of hope, yet there was also a visceral fear. Would embracing this opportunity lead him further from his father, or closer? The prospect of performing in front of influential figures could either validate him or expose him to critical scrutiny. "Jake is more interested in defining his own path," his father interjected, an unmistakable edge to his voice. "How can he do that within the constraints of this event?" Lena's gaze shifted back to his father, a slight smirk tugging the corners of her mouth. "You misunderstand the nature of these discussions, Mr. Staley. This isn't about constraints, it's about connection, letting voices be heard, even those that challenge the status quo." The words hung between them, underscoring a moment of tension that mirrored Jake's internal struggle. Could he voice his authentic self? Or would this symposium turn into another box to check, another expectation to fulfill? "It sounds interesting, but—" Jake hesitated, struggling to muster the courage to assert the very principles he had begun embracing moments ago. "What if I want to create something different? Like a project that speaks to me, rather than fitting into someone else's vision?" "Then let that be your driving force," Lena said, her enthusiasm palpable. "Use it as a guide. An opportunity to showcase your voice is what you make of it." He felt a fervent inspiration within her statement, yet doubt still clung to him. His father's wary expression anchored him in reality. "What if I fail?" he whispered, the question barely escaping his lips. "Jake," his father began, the weight of his own conflicting emotions evident, "all I ever wanted was for you to be happy. This symposium could be a chance to prove to yourself what you're capable of. You might surprise both of us." In that moment, the flicker of conflict ignited a determination within Jake. He could feel the tethers of his past loosening, even as he stood at the crossroads. This was the moment where he had to choose, beneath the warmth of possibility, wrapped in uncertainty. "I'll do it," Jake proclaimed, voices rising in tandem, with the growing conviction swelling within him. "But know that whatever I present will be mine, not anyone else's version. This is a start, not a destination." Lena's expression brightened, while his father blinked, caught off guard by this fierce declaration. "Then we must get to work," Lena responded enthusiastically. The anticipation hovered in the air as she began explaining logistics, the sanctuary formed by Jake's newfound resolve, quickly replaced by a whirlwind of activity. Jake felt the walls he'd fought against melt further, as each logistical detail became a tool to carve out his own space in the world. Yet beneath that surface resolve, he couldn't shake the feeling that this new path would still hold challenges that required him to dig deeper. As their meeting progressed, a thought crept in, one that hung above the conversation like an uninvited guest. "But what if stepping into this world brings me more conflict than resolution?" The brief silence that followed hinted at the struggles yet to come, a foreshadowing of the hurdles that lay ahead, both externally and within himself. Was he prepared for the challenges ahead? With each passing moment, Jake realized his journey had just begun, and the true test of his character and convictions was still on the horizon. Jake left the meeting in a daze, a mix of anticipation and trepidation swirling in his mind. He navigated through the venue's bustling corridors, the vibrant chatter of attendees and participants contrasting sharply with his inner tumult. Each face he passed seemed to belong to another potential critic or ally. Every conversation floated like an echo of the expectations that now pressed down on his shoulders. As he stepped outside, the crisp air filled his lungs, a stark reminder that he was standing on the precipice of a new beginning. Yet lingering doubts clawed at him. What if exposure brought ridicule instead of admiration? He remembered his father's voice, the cautious pride masked by uncertainty. "All I ever wanted was for you to be happy." The weight of those words sat heavily. They offered support, but also amplified his fears. He leaned against the building's facade, allowing the moment to wash over him. This was not just about the symposium. It was about stepping closer to the version of himself he had quietly nurtured for so long. It was time to confront not only the external challenges, but the internal barriers constructed from years of doubt and hesitation. Opening his phone, Jake reviewed a few fragments of writing he had tucked away on a notes app. The urgency of the impending presentation ignited a sense of duty within him, to make those words sing, to give them life beyond the screen. But what if he failed to translate his vision into something tangible? What if those pieces stumbled under the weight of scrutiny? That uncertainty gnawed at him, and he clenched his jaw. "This is it. You either take the leap or you stay safe in the shadows," he muttered to himself, allowing the solitude to fortify his decision. He located a nearby cafe, a cozy nook buzzing with the warmth of discussion and the clinking of cups. The atmosphere was charged with creativity. Each table held writers, artists, and thinkers lost in their worlds, reminding him of the community he yearned to embrace. Choosing a seat tucked away in the corner, he began to write anew, allowing the ink to flow like a release valve for the tension coiling in his chest. His fingers danced across the page, encapsulating emotions he had long left unexpressed. Ideas tumbled forth, messy but real. But as he wrote, a familiar unease surfaced. The nagging question remained, what would his father think? Each line he wrote felt like a potential rejection from the world he had once felt tethered to, a world where expectations dictated his next move. This was more than about proving himself to others. It was about confronting the critical voice inside him that echoed his father's worries. Does my value come from their approval? He wrestled with the thought as he scrawled the words, feeling a renewed ferocity as he defined what he truly wanted to say, raw, unfiltered. The coffee shop's ambient noises faded into a hum, and time slipped away, invulnerable to distractions. Jake found himself absorbed, transforming his trepidations into prose. With each word, a tick of his pulse, he pushed against the fear that had often paralyzed him. But with renewed focus came the realization that he could no longer remain on the sidelines. This project demanded not only his voice, but his fullest commitment. There would be no room for half measures. With that clarity crystallized, a surge of exhilaration coursed through him. The mere act of creation felt like reclaiming his freedom. As he finished the piece, a sense of empowerment settled deep within him, yet it was tempered by another realization. The symposium would not just be an opportunity for validation. It would also be a battleground where he would confront the very own fears that had held him captive for years. Standing up, energized and skyward-minded, he tucked the pages into his bag, ready to face whatever came next. The exhilaration brewed within him as he stepped outside, where the afternoon sun painted the world in hues of possibility. But as he walked away from the cafe, a lingering thought punctured his sense of triumph. What if the confrontation with his father is just the beginning of a much larger reckoning? Each step felt heavier yet forward-moving, as the impending conflict shape-shifted from possibility into an unavoidable reality. Jake now understood the truth. He was on a collision course with the past, armed with nothing but his words and a determination to carve his own path. The symposium day dawned, with the sunlight gilding Jake's nerves, a blend of anticipation and trepidation swirling within him. He had poured weeks of effort into crafting his story. His voice would finally echo in a room full of influential figures. But rising alongside that exhilaration was the ever-looming shadow of his father's expectations. This was not just a showcase, it was a potential pivot point in their relationship. Standing in front of the auditorium mirror, Jake rehearsed his lines, commitment woven into the very fabric of his thoughts. He had taken every shred of fear, every doubt, and spun them into something vibrant on the page. Today he would seize that narrative and lean into the connection he hoped to forge with his audience. They deserved the authentic Jake Thompson, not the muted reflection of what others wanted him to be. As he made his way through the throngs of attendees, whispers and conversations wrapped around him like a blanket. Yet he held on to a steadiness that had eluded him for years. The faces he passed, some out of familiarity, others completely new, each represented a door that could open into either validation or criticism. Jake stepped into the auditorium, which buzzed with energy, the stage casting a spell of gravity and expectation. Other participants were engaging in animated conversations, demonstrating their dynamic ideas about literature and art. He settled into a seat, deliberately focusing on the thrum of excitement, reminding himself that he was not just a son or a student. He was a storyteller now, ready to shape his narrative. Hours blurred with discussions that veered from poetry to personal essays, yet he remained restless, electric anticipation coursing through him. As the time approached for his turn to present, every ticking second amplified the pressure. He could feel the wave of anxiety, a constant reminder of the many moments he had shied away from being true to himself. Next, we have Jake Thompson, the facilitator announced, fastening the spotlight on him. He stood, knees trembling slightly but emboldened by purpose. As he approached the stage, he met the eyes of the audience, seeking connection, yearning for understanding. With deep breaths, each one infused with resolve, he clasped the edges of his paper. This was his moment to confront the fears that had stalked him silently, to assert his identity beneath the weight of expectations that had once felt all-consuming. Thank you for being here. My piece today is a reflection on legacy, expectations, and the journey towards self-definition, he began, heart racing but voice steady, echoing with a newfound confidence. As he delved into his story, the familiar lines poured forth, resonating not just with his experience, but intertwining with unspoken fears of his peers. Each word was a brushstroke, painting the landscape of his struggle, revealing the intricacies of his relationship with his father, the desire to break free from imposed narratives, and the cathartic realization of his own artistic identity. The audience listened with rapt attention as he wove the tale, weaving vulnerability and resilience into a tapestry that invited them into his world. He felt the energy shift, and for the first time he realized he was anchoring himself in the present, fighting not only for his voice, but for the truths that lay beneath the surface of their collective experience. This journey just wasn't his. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt trapped by expectation or limited by familial shadows. Jake could see approval mingled with empathy in their nods, their smiles urging him forward until he reached the final line. With the last phrase spoken, a profound silence enveloped the auditorium, time stretching as if caught in a delicate breath. Then, like the blossoming of spring, applause erupted, washing over him in waves of warmth and validation. As he stepped down from the stage, a reserved smile crept across his face. He had confronted the demons of self-doubt while claiming his identity in a public sphere, not as the sheriff's son, but as Jake Thompson, a writer, a navigator of his own destiny. The applause flooded him with profound relief, an acknowledgement that the hurdles over which he had stumbled could transform into platforms of growth. Jake stepped into the gathering crowd, where excited conversations filled the air, and smiled at the newfound connections being forged. Moments later, he noticed the familiar face of his father among the audience, the look on his face soft, yet contemplative. "Jake," his father approached, standing with an air of cautious pride. "I didn't realize how impactful your words could be. You've made a choice to follow your passion against all odds." "Thank you, Dad," Jake replied, heart racing, feeling the weight lift slightly. "I just needed to show you what I'm capable of. I can do this." "Your words held weight, Jake. Truth I didn't see before. I might not have understood your journey, but I now see it may be worth the risk," his father admitted, a hint of vulnerability shining through. Jake could feel the distance that had long stretched between them beginning to shrink. This dialogue marked a significant conversion, a bridge that would lead to moments filled with understanding going forward. He reached out, enveloping his father in an embrace tinged with the promise of open communication and recognition of his own path. "Let's keep talking and dive deeper into this together," Jake suggested. His father nodded, the weight of judgment replaced with support, the shadows of expectations transformed, leaving a realm of possibility where mutual respect could thrive. As Jake walked away that day, past the whispers of colleagues and dreams of new stories, he felt infused with a solid confidence bolstered by fragile but emerging acceptance. He had conquered this pivotal moment, proving to himself and others that the moments that once held him captive could also lead to profound connections and a significantly defined future. The horizon of ambition continued to unfold, but Jake understood now that the essence of growth was not merely in achieving accolades. It was about unveiling his truest self, nurturing the courage to transform pain into artistry, and establishing a voice that would rise anew in every encounter. As the world beckoned him forward, Jake felt the gravity of what came next, knowing it was only the beginning. You need to subscribe now to follow along with more powerful and transformative stories. This is the moment to show your support for creative journeys. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm so more people can find their true voices. Don't wait even one more second to share this journey with at least 5 friends who need to hear this inspiring conclusion.